The universe was old, but humanity was young. That in itself was an anomaly. Among the stars, civilizations that had lasted millennia structured themselves with precise hierarchies, rigid protocols, and an ironclad sense of order. Chaos was an aberration, a thing to be stamped out, and then humanity happened. They surged into the galactic stage with the reckless abandon of a species that had clawed its way up from mud and fire, surviving not by perfection, but by sheer adaptability. They had no singular leadership, no centralized doctrine, no grand plan. They improvised wildly, chaotically, brilliantly. To the Zh'kerr Dominion, the mere existence of such a species was a cosmic insult. The Zh'kerr were masters of structure, an empire that had spread across hundreds of worlds through meticulous conquest and assimilation. For thousands of years, they had refined their governance to an exact science. Warfare was calculated, alliances were mathematically determined, and dissent was a statistical anomaly that had long since been eradicated. For the Zh'kerr, every species they encountered was an equation to be solved, and the answer was always the same: submission. But humans, they refused to follow the equation. Their wars had no patterns, their negotiations had no logic, and their tactics defied all prediction models. When the Zh'kerr attempted diplomacy, humans responded with mistrust, jokes, and counteroffers. That made no sense. When they attempted intimidation, humans doubled down on their defiance, fracturing into a dozen factions that contradicted one another, yet somehow managed to survive and thrive. And so, the Zh'kerr determined that humanity was a threat, one that could not be left unchecked. They would bring order to the chaos, but chaos does not yield. The invasion began with unwavering precision. A fleet of 200 Zh'kerr warships, each a masterpiece of engineering, sleek, symmetrical, and terrifying in their perfection, emerged from fold space above Earth's colonies. Their message was clear, cold, and absolute. Submit to integration. Resistance is illogical. It should have been an easy conquest. Humanity was fractured, scattered across multiple planetary colonies, burdened by internal conflict and technologically inferior to the Zh'kerr war machine. The Dominion had never lost a war. Not in 10,000 years. They did not expect Captain Elias Vance. Vance had seen the reports. He knew what the Zh'kerr thought of them: primitive, chaotic, weak. They weren't wrong about the chaos, but they had underestimated what chaos could do in the right hands. He sat in the command chair of the UTF Valiant, one of humanity's most advanced, if barely held together, warships, running on a patchwork of outdated Terran tech and a few acquired alien upgrades. It was a disaster of engineering, but a disaster that worked, because humans made things work. The invasion order had come down hours ago. The Zh'kerr were mobilizing. Colonies were falling. The Council back on Earth was still arguing about protocol, and the United Terran Federation's generals were too busy debating tactics to act. So Vance decided, screw the chain of command. We're doing this our way. He activated a fleet-wide transmission. All right, listen up, you glorious psychos. The bugs think they've already won. They're wrong. We're about to show them why humanity is the most terrifying species in the goddamn galaxy. A beat of silence, then laughter, excited whoops. The crew of the Valiant thrived on insanity and adrenaline, and this was just another day of defying expectations. Dr. Valeria Song watched the chaos unfold from the war room, tapping a stylus against the glowing hollow display of the Zh'kerr fleet formations. She wasn't a soldier. She was a xenopsychologist, a scientist who studied alien behavior. And right now, she was terrified. Not of the Zh'kerr, but of humanity's response. The Zh'kerr had made their mistake the moment they assumed humans could be predicted. They had used logic, calculated probabilities, analyzed history, and determined that Earth's forces would follow a rational defensive strategy. They had no idea what was coming. Vance wasn't organizing defenses. He was turning the entire battle into a theater of absurdity. Misinformation was already spreading across comms, fake surrender signals, false distress beacons. Zh'kerr forces scrambled to verify data, but by the time they realized they'd been tricked, human strike teams were already tearing through their ranks, and it was only going to get worse. In the Zh'kerr command flagship, General Voktar watched the reports flood in with increasing frustration, disruptions, unexpected losses, untraceable human tactics. It was impossible. Every other species had fallen in line. Every war had followed a predictable structure. What were the humans even doing? A junior officer approached, his chitinous skin tight with stress, his mandibles clicking in confusion. "General, our battle projections are failing. Human fleet movements are erratic." Voktar's mandibles curled in irritation. "Define. Erratic." A pause. The officer hesitated. "They aren't following any patterns, sir. Every time we adjust strategy, they change tactics entirely. It's as if they have no overarching plan at all." Voktar's inner eyelids flicked. Shut in thought, no overarching plan, no structure, no pattern, pure, uncontrolled, chaos. The realization was slow, then chilling. The humans weren't losing control, they were weaponizing it. As the first day of battle stretched into night, the Zh'kerr forces found themselves overwhelmed, not by firepower, but by insanity. Their battle networks were hijacked with bizarre human transmissions, memes, jokes, nonsensical messages designed to overload their communications. Their supply lines were sabotaged by human strike teams posing as refugees, as allies, as diplomats, switching roles so quickly that the Zh'kerr couldn't establish clear enemy profiles. And worst of all, their morale was breaking. For the first time in their empire's long history, the Zh'kerr faced an enemy they could not control, and they were afraid. The Zh'kerr fleet had anticipated a battle. They had prepared for resistance. What they had not prepared for, what their most advanced predictive algorithms and military strategists had failed to even consider, was an enemy that refused to follow any logical structure. The invasion had started with precision. It was supposed to be quick and clean, a demonstration of overwhelming force that would compel humanity to submit to the natural order. The Zh'kerr believed, as they always had, that any species faced with inevitable defeat would recognize its place and accept its fate. But humans did not accept fate. They kicked it in the teeth and set it on fire. At 1700 hours UTC, the first Zh'kerr troop carriers descended upon the human colony of New Berlin, orbital shock troops, trained in flawless formation-based combat, deployed with mathematical precision. Their drop pods burned through the atmosphere, hitting the surface in perfect synchronization. Each squad of 8 emerged as one, fluid, disciplined, unshaken. Then the screaming started, not from civilians, from the Zh'kerr troops. Within minutes, their tight formations collapsed into complete disarray. New Berlin wasn't a war zone, it was anarchy incarnate. The colony had no structured defense force, only an assortment of private security contractors, independent mercenaries, ex-military survivalists and outright lunatics, and instead of resisting with order, they fought with absolute, unrestrained chaos. The moment the Zh'kerr set foot on the streets, they were hit with a maelstrom of improvised combat strategies. Civilians armed with scavenged weapons fired from every possible direction. No discernible attack patterns, no clear front line, just unrelenting aggression. Traps disguised as surrender points. Zh'kerr forces entered supposedly secured buildings only to trigger home-rigged explosives or fall into ambush zones. Psychological warfare at its worst. Blaring music, war cries, and outright mockery flooded their comms. The Zh'kerr's disciplined mind struggled to process taunts, insults, and intentionally nonsensical messages meant to overload their tactical AI feeds. 1. Transmission stood out. "Yo, bug boy. Wanna dance? No? Well, too bad. Bam!" Explosion noise. The sheer lack of structure was an attack in itself. General Zh'kerr watched the battle unfold from his command seat aboard the flagship Dominion's spear. He could not believe what he was seeing. His forces were losing ground to what could only be described as a disorganized mob. The battle reports made no sense. Human resistance patterns were inconsistent. Their defensive lines didn't hold. They shattered and reformed at will. Every tactical adaptation the Zh'kerr attempted was met with something completely different the next moment. It was like fighting a storm. He issued a command to his tactical AI demanding a predictive battle algorithm. The system struggled to process the inputs. Instead of a coherent analysis, the AI returned 600 conflicting possibilities, none of which had a probability rating higher than 12%. The AI had no idea what was happening. Neither did Zh'kerr. He clenched his mandibles, his two primary arms tightening around the command console. This was impossible. He ordered reinforcements to the ground, additional shock troops, armored walkers, aerial support drones. It did not help. The humans did not fight fair. They stole Zh'kerr weapons, hijacked their drones, and hacked into enemy comm channels, not to gather intel, but to play loud, distorted music and shout absurd battle cries in broken Zh'kerr dialects. A particularly egregious human voice crackled over the comms. "Bzzzt. Hello, this is your captain speaking. Please fasten your mandibles because turbulence is incoming. We hope you enjoy your stay in Welcome to Hell, Population U." Then an orbital missile strike meant to eliminate resistance backfired. Somehow, the humans had hacked into the targeting system, causing the strike to redirect onto a Zh'kerr supply convoy instead. This was no longer a battle. It was an absolute catastrophe. On board the UTF Valiant, Captain Elias Vance laughed. This was exactly what he wanted. The Zh'kerr thought they were fighting a war. But humans turned war into a joke, with a punchline that exploded. He leaned back in his chair, eyes locked on the tactical display. Not that he trusted it to make sense. He had long since given up on planning in favor of creative improvisation. "All right." He grinned, addressing his officers. "Let's turn up the crazy." Dr. Valeria Song, who had been watching all of this unfold with horrified fascination, finally spoke. "This isn't a strategy," she muttered. "This is insanity." Vance winked. "Yeah, and that's why we're winning." Back on the ground, General Zh'kerr made a final desperate decision. If structured battle was impossible, then he would unleash absolute force. No more tactical maneuvering. No more strategic formations. He ordered a full planetary bombardment. All Zh'kerr warships redirected their primary cannons, preparing to turn New Berlin into a crater of fire and ash. The Zh'kerr did not retreat. They erased their enemies, and yet, the moment the order was issued, everything shut down. The Dominion Spear's main reactor dimmed, emergency lights flickering. Tactical displays went black. All Zh'kerr targeting systems failed simultaneously. Confused, Zh'kerr turned to his chief technician, mandibles clicking in frustration. "Report." The technician stared blankly at the screen. "Sir, the humans have hacked our primary targeting relays." Zh'kerr's secondary eyelids flicked shut in disbelief. "Impossible. They lack the technology." The technician did not look up. "They don't need technology, sir. They just need access to our software." A new transmission came through. Zh'kerr expected a threat, a demand, an ultimatum. Instead, the human voice that spoke was mocking, almost casual. "Hey, General Zh'kerr. Quick question. How does it feel knowing you've already lost?" Silence. The voice continued. "Oh, by the way, your fleet's firing controls? Yeah, we rerouted those. You try to bomb us, you'll actually just nuke your own ships. Bummer, huh? Static. Then a final message. So, what's the game plan now? Big guy, the comm line cut out. And Vokta? He froze, realization sinking into his core. His species had never faced an enemy like this, not in 10,000 years, and for the first time in Zh'kerr history, an entire Dominion fleet surrendered. The Zh'kerr Dominion had never known defeat. Until now. And it wasn't because of superior firepower, it wasn't because of advanced tactics, it was because humanity was insane. The surrender of Vokta's fleet sent shockwaves across the Dominion's high command. The War Council, composed of the most disciplined, rational minds of the Zh'kerr elite, could not process what had happened. Their most advanced military force had been crippled, not by technological superiority, but by unpredictability. The humans had hacked their systems using nonsense and misinformation. They had tricked them into sabotaging their own supply lines. They had weaponized confusion itself. And worst of all, they were laughing about it. The Dominion had always believed that war was a game of logic and precision, but humanity did not play that game. They flipped the board over, set it on fire, and started throwing pieces at their enemies. And it worked. On board the UTF Valiant, Captain Elias Vance watched the reports roll in. The Dominion's entire war effort was stalling. Fleet movements were delayed. Zh'kerr officers refused to deploy without fully verified orders, which took too long to process. Because human misinformation flooded every system, and in that delayed hesitation, humanity struck hard. Guerrilla units launched hit-and-run raids against key installations. Sabotage teams infiltrated enemy bases disguised as Zh'kerr diplomats, speaking horrifically broken versions of the alien language to sow even more confusion. 1. Captured battle log summed it up perfectly. The humans, they do not fight. They erupt. They do not follow patterns. They infect. Every attempt to contain them only spreads more disorder. They are not an army. They are entropy itself. And entropy was winning. But not all Zh'kerr were blind to the truth. Among the Dominion's high command, a dissenting voice began to rise. Admiral Zh'kerr had studied human history, not as a curiosity, but as a warning. He had seen what happened to every force that underestimated them. He had seen how humans turned their own weaknesses into weapons. And now he saw the inevitable collapse of the Dominion's rigid system. The Zh'kerr were breaking. Some fleets had refused further combat, unwilling to risk exposure to human chaos warfare. Some officers had suffered mental collapses, unable to cope with the constant unpredictability. And some had begun to question the very foundation of their empire. Zh'kerr saw the truth. If the Zh'kerr did not adapt, they would not survive. And so he made a choice. He would do the unthinkable. He would embrace the chaos. Vance was not expecting the message when it arrived, a direct Zh'kerr transmission, coded in a way that suggested it was being sent without High Command's approval. He played it, half expecting a trap. Instead, Admiral Zh'kerr's voice filled the command deck. "We must speak." Vance leaned forward, intrigued. "All right, bug boy," he muttered to himself. "Let's see what you've got." The meeting took place in neutral space, aboard a derelict station, its lights flickering, its structure creaking from years of abandonment. A perfect symbol of the crumbling war. Zh'kerr stood across from Vance, his form rigid but unreadable. Vance, in contrast, stood casually, arms crossed, one foot resting on a rusted-out console. They studied each other, Predator and Enigma, two opposing forces that should never have met like this. Finally, Zh'kerr spoke. "You are destroying us." Vance smirked. "Yeah, that was kind of the point." Zh'kerr did not flinch. "I do not seek surrender. I seek understanding." That made Vance pause. The Admiral's voice carried no arrogance, no bitterness, just cold acceptance. And then he said something Vance did not expect. "Teach us." Vance's smirk faded. "Teach you?" Recklear's mandibles clicked once. Yes, teach us how to survive you. Silence hung between them. It was the first time in Zh'kerr history that one of their own had asked to learn from another species. Vance exhaled, rubbing his jaw. Then he grinned. "All right, bug boy. First lesson, you're gonna have to loosen." Up it started small. A single Zh'kerr fleet under Recklear's command began to experiment with unorthodox tactics. At first it was slow, uncertain, awkward. Rigid formations loosened slightly. Squads were allowed individual decision-making authority. And then something strange happened. They began winning. The rest of the Dominion saw this and reacted with horror. Recklear was a traitor. He was embracing disorder. He was infected. The High Command panicked. And in their panic, they did what all rigid systems do when they encounter a threat they do not understand. They tried to eradicate it. The civil war within the Dominion erupted overnight. Recklear's forces, small but adaptive, fought not for conquest, but for survival. Meanwhile, the traditionalists within the Dominion launched purge campaigns against any Zh'kerr suspected of human contamination. Entire fleets turned on each other. Vance watched the reports roll in, and for the first time he felt a twinge of unease. Dr. Song voiced what he had been afraid to say aloud. "We didn't just win." She turned to him, eyes dark with understanding. "We infected them," Vance exhaled slowly. "Yeah, and now it's spreading." The war was no longer humanity versus the Zh'kerr. It was chaos versus order. And the galaxy would never be the same again. The Zh'kerr Dominion was fracturing. Where once there had been order, there was now anarchy. Where once there had been loyalty, there was now civil war. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Dominion was fighting itself, and at the center of it all, humanity watched. Not as conquerors, but as a spark that had ignited an inferno. The Zh'kerr homeworld, Nalvir, had never known war. For millennia, it had been the unshakable foundation of their empire, a world of immaculate cities, towering spires, and flawless efficiency. But now the skies burned. Recklear's chaos fleet, a ragtag armada of defectors, insurgents, and radicalized Zh'kerr, who had embraced adaptation, descended upon High Command's last stronghold. It was unthinkable. The traditionalist forces, led by Supreme Strategist Zal Mor, outnumbered Recklear's fleet 10-1. They had the best ships, the most disciplined warriors, the greatest tactical minds of the Dominion's history. By every logical measure, they should have won. But logic did not apply anymore, because humanity had taught Recklear well. The battle began as High Command expected, with standard fleet formations, precise firing patterns, and structured maneuvers. But within minutes, Recklear's forces abandoned formation entirely. They scattered, moving in erratic, unpredictable vectors, disrupting every predictive model the traditionalists relied on. Then came the misinformation. False distress signals, fake surrender requests, hacked command orders redirecting enemy reinforcements to empty coordinates, and finally, the psychological warfare. A broadcast hijacked every comm channel in the system. The voice that spoke was not Zh'kerr. It was human. "Hey, bug boys, let's talk about mistakes." The voice was casual, mocking, impossible to ignore. "Captain Elias Vance. See, here's the thing about fighting humans. You never actually know if you're winning, because even when we lose, we don't really lose. We just change the rules." The Zh'kerr fleet hesitated. Vance kept going. "You thought you were fighting a war. Wrong. You're fighting an idea. And that idea," a pause. Then laughter. "That idea is that we don't stop." The hesitation cost High Command everything. In those critical moments, Recklear's forces rushed through the gaps in their broken formations. Their ships moved like predators, striking fast, then vanishing into debris clouds. Their ground forces used human-style guerrilla tactics, turning the immaculate streets of Nahal into a battlefield of complete disorder. And then, the final blow. Vance, watching from orbit aboard the UTF Valiant, sent a single transmission, not to the rebels, not to High Command, but to the citizens of the Zh'kerr homeworld. For thousands of years, information control had been absolute. The Dominion only told its people what it wanted them to know. It had kept them obedient, fearful, structured. Now, Vance gave them everything. A data burst containing the entire history of the war was broadcast to every screen, every terminal, every device on the planet. The citizens of Nalvir saw it all: the surrender of Voktar's fleet, the unraveling of High Command's strategies, the chaos tactics that shattered their greatest warriors, the realization that their leaders had been lying to them for centuries. The streets erupted, not in battle, but in revolt. Inside the central citadel, Supreme Strategist Zalmor watched his empire crumble in real time. His own troops were abandoning him. His people were rejecting the very foundations of Zh'kerr rule. And in orbit above, Recklear's fleet stood victorious. Zalmor did not understand. He had done everything right. He had followed protocol, strategy, order. How? How had everything gone so wrong? He turned to his advisors, his voice shaking. "What do we do?" one of them answered, his mandibles trembling. "We adapt." And just like that, the Dominion was no more. The war had ended, not with a treaty, nor with a battle won by force, but with an empire breaking under the weight of its own rigidity. The Zh'kerr had not been conquered. They had been out-evolved, and humanity had changed them forever. On board the UTF Valiant, Vance watched as the once mighty Zh'kerr Dominion fell into something new. Species that had once prided itself on order was now embracing uncertainty. It wasn't peace. Not yet. But it was possibility. Dr. Valeria Song stood beside him, arms crossed. Her voice was quiet, but thoughtful. "Do you think we did the right thing?" Vance exhaled, staring at the chaotic mess they had left in their wake. "I don't know." Then after a moment, "But I do know one thing." He turned, smirking. "If they think this was bad, wait till they meet the rest of the galaxy." A beat of silence, then laughter. The war was over, but war never truly ends. It only changes shape. The Zh'kerr Dominion had ruled for 10,000 years, its foundation built upon unyielding structure, absolute order, and unwavering discipline. Now, all of that was gone, and humanity had left a wound so deep that it would never fully heal. From orbit, the once pristine cities of Nalvir lay in disarray, not destroyed, not burned to the ground, but fractured, like a machine whose gears had broken free from their constraints. The people of Nalvir no longer moved in perfect unison. There was no longer one voice, one rule, one mind. For the first time in their history, the Zh'kerr were arguing with themselves, and that, more than any battle, was humanity's true victory. Yet Vance felt no triumph. He watched from the bridge of the UTF Valiant, hands clasped behind his back, expression unreadable. Dr. Valeria Song stood beside him, observing the chaos below with the same quiet unease. After everything, she couldn't shake the feeling that they had done something irreversible. "We broke an empire," she murmured. "What if we just made everything worse?" Vance let out a slow breath. "We didn't break them." He gestured toward the planet. "We just showed them what was already broken." She wasn't sure if that made it better or worse. Admiral Recklear had done the impossible. He had dismantled the greatest empire his species had ever known, and now he had to rebuild it. But how do you lead a species that has only ever known obedience? How do you teach a people who have never thought for themselves how to decide their own future? Recklear stood before what remained of his fleet, his mandibles clicking in uncertainty. For the first time, there was no single command to give no central doctrine to dictate their next steps. Instead, there was debate, chaos. And that, above all, terrified him. Yet deep within, beneath the layers of his species' instinctive aversion to disorder, something else stirred, something new. For the first time in his life, Zh'kerr was not following a predetermined path. He was making his own choice, and it felt liberating. The fall of the Zh'kerr Dominion sent shockwaves across the galaxy. For centuries, the other great powers had lived in the shadow of the Dominion, respecting their unyielding might and efficiency. Now, the once mighty empire was fractured, its fleets divided, its leadership splintered, its people unsure of what to do next, and the rest of the galaxy took notice. New threats emerged, eager to fill the void left behind. Old enemies of the Dominion rose from the ashes, seeking revenge, and, at the center of it all, humanity stood, unpredictable, relentless, and more feared than ever before. They had not just won a war, they had proven a truth that no empire wanted to admit. Control is an illusion, order is fragile, and chaos always wins. Aboard the UTF Valiant, a final transmission blinked onto the main display. It was from Zh'kerr. His image appeared, no longer the rigid, calculating officer he had once been, but something changed. He met Vance's gaze through the screen. "We will not forget what you have done." Vance leaned forward, studying him. "Good. I'd hate to think we went through all this trouble for nothing." A pause, then something no Zh'kerr had ever done before. Zh'kerr smirked. It was small, subtle, but unmistakable, and then with a final nod, the transmission cut out. As the ship drifted through space, Dr. Song sighed. "Do you ever wonder if we're the villains in someone else's story?" Vance chuckled. "We're the villains in everyone's story." She shot him a look. "That doesn't bother you?" He thought about it for a moment, then, with a lopsided grin, "Nah." Outside, the stars stretched endlessly before them, a galaxy forever changed by humanity's touch. And somewhere, in the vast unknown, the next great challenge waited. Humanity would be ready, because chaos never rests, and neither do humans. The galaxy was not at peace. It never would be, but something had shifted. The Zh'kerr Dominion, once an unbreakable monolith of order and control, had fractured into something new. And humanity? Humanity had carved its name into history in the only way it knew how: loud, unpredictable, unstoppable. 3 weeks after the war's official end, a strange transmission was detected across multiple sectors, encrypted, fragmented, and nearly unreadable. It wasn't Zh'kerr, it wasn't human, but it was watching. On board the UTF Valiant, Vance stood with his arms crossed as Dr. Song analyzed the data. "It's a message," she murmured, adjusting the filters to remove the distortion. "But the language, it doesn't match anything in our database." The screen flickered, and then a single phrase resolved itself into something intelligible. Not in Zh'kerr, not in Galactic Standard. In English. "We have seen the chaos. We have seen what you are. We are coming." A beat of silence. Then Vance grinned. "Well, that can't be good." In the far corner of the galaxy, beyond the reach of known space, something stirred, something ancient, something that had watched the rise and fall of countless empires. For eons, it had remained dormant, waiting for the balance of the cosmos to remain stable, but now that balance had been broken. The chaos of humanity had disrupted the great equilibrium, and so, for the first time in 1,000 millennia, it moved, not to conquer, not to enslave, but to contain. Because chaos unchecked was a virus, and humanity was the plague. As the UTF Valiant drifted through the void, Vance exhaled slowly. Dr. Song watched him carefully. "We should warn the Council." Vance nodded. "Yeah, we probably should." A pause. Then that familiar smirk. But where's the fun in that?